Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman from North Somerset. I must say, when I was listening to him, you can already see the red lines that caused the problem for the previous Prime Minister are coming back, that were to do a trade deal by the end of 2020. But at the same time, we're not to have any degree of alignment with the European Union. But when we hear talk of writing into this bill that it's to be a matter of legislation, that there will be no extension, that is a matter of politics, and if a government can legislate for that today, equally it can legislate to remove that burden before the end of 2020. And I predict, Mr. Speaker, that that may indeed end up the position that we're in, because the harsh reality is that by placing that deadline, that risk of a no-deal Brexit that we all fear is very much back on the table again. Mr. Speaker, Scotland could not have been clearer last week. We did not vote for Brexit, and returning the SNP with a greater mandate shows Scotland still totally and utterly rejects Brexit. Yet the Prime Minister is blindly hurtling towards the cliff edge with these deeply damaging Brexit plans that will leave us poorer, that will leave us worse off. This legislation will hit our economy, cost thousands of jobs in Scotland, sell out our food and drink sector and harm people's livelihoods. Mr. Speaker, the Scottish National Party will not vote for this flawed and deeply damaging legislation. We reject this toxic Brexit legislation and make the case clear that this UK government cannot drag Scotland out of the European Union before gaining the legislative consent of the Scottish Parliament. And my question to the Prime Minister, will he accept that the devolved administrations have that right to withhold their legislative consent? Will he now enter into constructive dialogue with those that seek to defend our rights, our Parliament in Edinburgh and our First Minister? Because we know the reality is that this Prime Minister will ignore Scotland. He'll keep ploughing ahead. Despite the fact that Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, and at last week's general election, Scotland voted decisively to escape Brexit and put Scotland's future in Scotland's hands. A Prime Minister with no mandate to drag Scotland out of the European Union. It's clearer than ever, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Scotland must have their say over their future rather than the broken Brexit Britain that he wishes to impose upon us.
Would he give way?
Mr. Speaker, our economy will be smaller, weaker and poorer as a result of leaving the European Union. Why? Because of the ideology of the Brexit fanboys, those in the Leave EU campaign that now run this government. Mr. Speaker, despite the Prime Minister's assertions, Brexit is already having an impact on our economy. Analysis in Scotland's Chief Economist's State of the Economy report shows that continuing uncertainty is resulting in a £500 million shortfall to business investment in Scotland. That, Mr. Speaker, is the price of Brexit. And, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't matter whether it's this Brexit or another Brexit. The analysis shows that all forms of Brexit will harm Scotland's economy and result in lower household incomes. I will give him.
Grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He will be aware that before the referendum, we were told that if the country voted to leave, there would be economic Armageddon, that there'd be rising unemployment, rising interest rates, and so on. None of it actually materialised. Why does he persist in scaremongering when it hasn't materialised in the past, and it's about time that he had confidence in the United Kingdom and looked at the cup being half full rather than half empty? Look at the evidence.
Mr. Speaker, let me say to the honourable gentleman that we've looked at the evidence. I've just given him the fact of lower investment in Scotland, and the fact is, when Brexit happened, that the pound fell. that inflation rose. And let me just give him 2 examples of the stupidity of those that want to push ahead with this project. We lost the jobs of the European Banking Authority. We lost the jobs of the European Medicines Agency. 2,000 well-paid jobs lost in London. And why? And the Prime Minister sits in his seats and he laughs. He laughs about the loss of these institutions, centred here in London, the loss of influence that we have over the importance of new medicines coming to the United Kingdom, because that's what Brexit is going to do. Scotland's place in Europe provided detailed analysis on the macroeconomic implications of Brexit for the Scottish economy, outlining that membership of the European Single Market and Customs Union is the least worst option for jobs and investment. We sought to compromise with the UK government on that, yet this government is here, ripping us out of these markets, risking great instability and economic chaos. The members on the opposite benches are quite prepared to reduce jobs and opportunities simply on the basis of ideology. Mr. Speaker, membership is vital for trade. In 2017, Scotland exported £14.9 billion of goods to the European Union. Closing down membership of the single market and the customs union is closing down opportunities for Scottish businesses. And it's not just goods, but people that this government is looking to lock down opportunities for. Mr. Speaker, approximately 209,000 EU citizens live in Scotland, bringing in new skills and expertise. Skills and expertise absolutely vital to our industries and to the local economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, in the debate earlier on, and in an intervention from my honourable friend from Edinburgh South West, the issue of unaccompanied minors was raised. And I have to say that on the basis of the response for the Prime Minister, he clearly hasn't read his own bill and explanatory notes, because let me just read what it says. Clause 37 amends subsection 1 of section 17 of the EU Withdrawal Act 2018 to remove, Mr. Speaker, the obligation to seek to negotiate an agreement and replace it with a requirement to make a statement to Parliament. That is the harsh reality. And I say to honourable and right honourable members opposite, think very carefully. Think very carefully as to what you're about to do, because you're just about to bring up the drawbridge. Bring up the drawbridge and stop that right of unaccompanied minors coming to the United Kingdom. What a disgrace!
Why is it in there then?
What a disgrace!
Why is it in there?
And a real indication of who are the real separatists, who are the real isolationists in the way that they are seeking to behave. And we should be very afraid of what this Conservative government is seeking to do.
Keep going. Why is it
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is simply not interested in Scotland's economy. He has made clear with his manifesto mantra that it's all about getting Brexit done. Getting the Prime Minister's Brexit done will leave the United Kingdom £70 worse off than if it had remained in the European Union. That's according to a study by the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that the Tories couldn't care less about Scotland, because Scotland alone of the United Kingdom nations is being singled out for unfair treatment. The only United Kingdom country to be taken out of the European Union against our will, and with no say, Mr. Speaker, no say whatsoever as to our future. England and Wales voted leave. England and Wales will leave. Northern Ireland is getting a special deal and the right to decide their own future. The Prime Minister offers Scotland nothing. Nothing. Hee-haw. Diddly squat. That's what we get from this government and its so-called precious union. Nothing but disrespect for our government and our rights. I'll give you this one.
He mentions England and Wales, but in the last election, 16.5 million people voted for Remain parties and 14.5 million for Leave, and the Remain vote was divided. So doesn't he agree that the least this government can do is to provide democratic scrutiny to have a soft Brexit that allows alignment with workers' rights, with the environment, and scrutiny, all importantly, over trade deals with the United States and elsewhere.
Well, of course, there has to be effective scrutiny, but on that specific issue, the legislation offers no guarantees on workers and environmental standards or, Mr Speaker, protection for the NHS from a future trade deal with the US. Of course, we know it will hit jobs and living standards. It will leave Scottish businesses possibly facing a competitive disadvantages with businesses in Northern Ireland. And the Prime Minister can talk about trade deals all he wants. But the harsh reality is that the basic trade agreement of the type he wants to negotiate will lead to GDP being lower by the equivalent of £1,600 per person compared with EU membership. You know, people are going to be worse off, and people can watch and listen to this debate, and what they hear are honourable members and right honourable members opposite laughing. That's the seriousness that they show to these crucial issues. Mr Speaker, is it any wonder that the people of Scotland, armed with the facts, aware of the deceit from a Vote Leave campaign and the Brexiteers in Number 10, came out in huge numbers last week and backed the Scottish National Party to escape this government's disastrous Brexit? And escaping Brexit is now the only option to protect our economy. We tried time and time again to compromise, but the Tories simply are not listening to Scotland. That is why yesterday Scotland's First Minister wrote to the Prime Minister to transfer power from the United Kingdom Government to hold a referendum of independence to the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Government has a clear democratic mandate from the 2016 Holyrood election to offer the people of Scotland a choice over Scotland's future within the terms of this Parliament. There is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014. And let me just nail once and for all this issue about once in a generation, because it was made clear in the declaration that was signed between the two governments that it did not obstruct a future independence referendum. That, Mr Speaker, is the fact of the matter.
Go back to David Cameron.
Mr Speaker, last week we won that mandate again. Scotland must consent to its own future. Westminster's arrogance and ignorance has treated Scotland with contempt for too long. It would simply be undemocratic to ignore the will and the voice and the ask of the Scottish people. If the Tories think Scotland doesn't want independence, then give us our say. What is to be feared by more democracy? Everything has changed. And that's why, Mr Speaker, the Scottish National Party today demand, if the Prime Minister isn't running scared, give Scotland its choice, its right to choose its own future. We have a way out of this Brexit mess, and I appeal to those in Scotland who have supported other parties. Come with us. Complete the powers of our Parliament. We can escape Brexit. We can take our own responsibilities. There is a better way out that will secure our economy, allow us to tackle inequality and to deal with the climate emergency. It is not this Tory Brexit. We can save ourselves from that. Mr Speaker, it is time for Scottish independence.